The burning question: do different fats have the same number of calories, also known as kilocalories, per gram? Our research question is, do different fats have the same number of calories, also known as kilocalories per gram? And it's important to note for this experiment that calories with a big C is what we refer to as our food calories, as opposed to calories with a little c. And based on our research, it was found that there are 9 calories per gram for fats. However, we wanted to test specific types of dietary fats to see if modified fats, such as hydrogenated fats, had any differences compared to natural fats, such as unsaturated and saturated fats. And we hypothesized that these different fats would have a different number of calories per gram due to the difference in molecular structure.
Design and methodology. Samples included the testing of saturated fat, unsaturated fat, hydrogenated fat, and water as our control. The samples were made from scratch so that the experiment could be more controlled as opposed to using commercially prepared samples. This way we could measure the fats following the end of the trial during calculations. The samples were made from flour and different substances. We used coconut oil representing saturated fat, vegetable oil as unsaturated fat, and margarine representing hydrogenated fat. Once 13.6 grams of substance was combined with 35 grams of flour, each sample was rolled out and baked at 204 degrees Celsius for 15 minutes before setting out overnight to dry. A homemade calorimeter was used to perform the experiment so we could test each sample using the same method and equipment. The can on the calorimeter holding the water was insulated with a layer of cotton balls and duct tape on the exterior. This helped ensure that any raise in temperature was from the burning of the sample, not from the heat escaping the can during the experiment. The base had several small holes drilled in so that the burning sample could have sufficient supply of oxygen.
A thermometer was used to determine the initial temperature and the final temperature of the 100 grams of water in the calorimeter. Both temperatures were recorded for use of calculations. One large sample was made, which was then broken down into testable size pieces. Each sample had a recorded mass that was then used to determine the exact amount of flour and fat in each sample. With this, we could determine the calories from fat after calculations. Each sample was placed on a pin inside the calorimeter and lit on fire. The trial ended as soon as the sample no longer presented a flame. As soon as the flame ended, the final temperature of the water was recorded. The change in temperature from each sample was calculated and then converted from degrees Fahrenheit to degrees Celsius.
And this was our data. On the right-hand side, we have the tables for each one of our samples, including saturated fat, unsaturated fat, and hydrogenated fat. We have the sample mass, the change in temperature in degrees Celsius, and the number of kilocalories. The number of calories was determined by the following equation. Q equals Cm change in T, where C is the specific heat of water, M is the sample mass, and change in T is the change in water temperature. Once Q is found, it must be divided by 1,000 to find the number of calories, also known as kilocalories. It's important to note that calorie with a capital C is 1 kilocalorie, which equals 1,000 calories with a lowercase c. We then decided to put our data into a more comparable format. So we found the average mass of each sample and the average kilocalories of each sample. We then used the steps on the left-hand side to find the number of kilocalories per gram of each fat. And we put this into the graph on the right-hand side.
This is our analysis. The data below describes the overall results from the experiment. So we found that the average kilocalories per gram of saturated fat was 11.88. The average kilocalories for unsaturated fat was 11.33, and the average kilocalories per gram of hydrogenated fat was 11.58. Our data includes both the average kilocalories per gram for each sample and fat tested. The average number of kilocalories per gram of fat for each sample are the results we concluded our experiment on, as the average of each sample included the kilocalories of flour along with the fat. It was concluded that the different fats tested do not have the exact number of calories per gram, rather around the same number of calories per gram. The difference in data is within 1/10 of a decimal, making the difference insignificant.
Interpretation. Several errors were presented during the experiment. They included the following. Our control was not combustible due to the lack of oil. Therefore, we did not have a control to compare our results to. The kilocalories per gram was higher than the expected outcome of 9 kilocalories per gram, most likely due to an error in our experiment. The top of the cork that supported the pin, which held the sample, would often catch on fire, and this would cause an increase in water temperature, resulting in an elevated calorie measurement. Inconsistencies resulted from the crumbling of the sample while placing it on the pin. Because it would crumble after weighing it, the mass would sometimes slightly vary from its original recorded mass when burned, affecting the kilocalories per gram measurement. An inference as to why every fat tested resulted in having around 11.6 calories per gram is because the fats are broken down using usable energy when the fatty acid chains break away from the glycerol, holding them together with an ester bond in the triglyceride. The differences between the fats are in the acid chain, meaning that the ester bonds between all fats are the same. This would explain why different fats have the same number of calories, energy stored in the bond, but different health effects.
Our experiment showed that saturated, unsaturated, and hydrogenated fats have around, if not the same, number of calories per gram. We hypothesized that different fats would have a different number of calories per gram, and our results did not support this hypothesis. Our results concluded that the average number of calories per gram for all the fats tested was around 11.6 calories per gram. These results were unexpected as other researchers arrived at the results of around 9 calories per gram for fat. Several errors in our experiment led to the increased number of 9 to 11.6, such as the cork sometimes catching on fire in addition to the sample, resulting in an increased water temperature. Despite our measured data being inconsistent with our research, our measurements show precision, which is important for comparison. The results from the experiment demonstrate the importance for making conscious dietary choices in life. Fats help our body store energy, so it's essential we consume a moderate quantity of it to live a healthy life. It's important to understand that even though saturated, unsaturated, and hydrogenated fats have a similar number of calories per gram, which contribute to weight gain, they have very different effects on the body. Consuming too many saturated and hydrogenated fats are known to raise LDL, which is known as bad cholesterol, levels and cause cholesterol buildup in the arteries. These effects correspond to an increased risk of heart disease and stroke. On the contrary, unsaturated fats have many beneficial roles to the body, including lowering LDL levels, easing inflammation, and reducing the risk of rheumatoid arthritis. When striving to live a healthy life, it is important to understand what food has in it and the effects it has on the body.